Story 1. I do not think most people are aware that they are living paycheck to paycheck. Story 2. Since almost everyone is affected, talking about it quickly becomes boring. Story 3. The flip side of the myth that there is opportunity for everyone in America is that if you are failing, it must be your fault. The system profits when people blame themselves for its failings. There is shame and social stigma in admitting that life is a struggle. If everyone were open about that, there might be impetus for change, and the system does not want that. Story 4. They either think that's just the way life works or are embarrassed by it. There is nothing to talk about. Story 5. Part of the fiction of the American dream is that poverty is caused by moral turpitude. Story 6. People will start telling you how you should save money and what you should stop spending money on. Story 7. Many people live paycheck to paycheck because they prioritize spending over saving. Story 8. Around 20 to 30% of people live paycheck to paycheck, and that is a problem. It is a common misconception that most people live this way. Story 9. Because it will raise the question of what they spend their money on, and people are not ready to answer that. Story 10. Income is only loosely linked to lifestyle. Some people earning six-figure incomes manage to live paycheck to paycheck because they feel they must keep up with the Joneses, while others with modest incomes are financially stable. Story 11. People do not want to be told what to do. No matter their economic situation, preserving dignity is more important than forcing people to take action. Often you know exactly what another person should do to correct their course for the better, but telling them they must do one, two, three things sounds judgmental and creates more drama than it is worth. The saying live and let live applies everywhere. Story 12. Many people talk about it, but not the people who can actually broadcast the information. We must start speaking more often, and eventually we will have a voice. Story 13. The last person I talked to who said he lived paycheck to paycheck was putting $1,500 into savings and $1,000 into retirement each month. Laughing out loud. Story 14. You are assuming that most people are good with money, but they are not and do not need to live paycheck to paycheck. Story 15. It shocked me when I realized how many people I work with did this. I think people do not talk about it because it is a bit embarrassing. Story 16. Many people grew up that way and think it is just how life is. They are accustomed to carrying credit card debt, so they do not have to feel poor. Some of the poorest people I know are the best dressed and eat out every weekend. My parents said that when they were poor back in the day, it meant eating rice and beans for every meal because they did not even have the option of using a credit card. Story 17. We are apes. We want to show the world that we are living the dream. That is why Instagram is popular. Story 18. The idea of being financially sound versus drowning in debt to keep up with the Joneses while also caring for mental health and having a reasonable number of hobbies is odd. People seem to either accept living quietly for the time being until circumstances change and financial goals are met, or they wear a fake smile while the bills keep piling up. This creates a dynamic in which both sides feel they are wrong and remain silent. Story 19. Who are they going to talk to? Their coworkers or friends who are also living paycheck to paycheck. Their partner who already knows. Their family they have been trying to do their best for. Their 23 followers who are just those same people. Story 20. It's part of the design. They shame poverty and make it taboo to talk about money. We do not talk about salaries, which allows employers to screw us over. We do not talk about being broke, because that would stop the need to keep up with your neighbors, which drives the economy. Story 21. Raised in a paycheck-to-paycheck household, your lifestyle becomes molded to avoid acting on impulse. Starbucks, Pizza Hut, movies. Living within your means is possible while keeping your head above water. But if you have an unexpected car problem, your whole fragile system goes on life support. You may end up walking to work, eating a Pop-Tart, and skipping lunch. Story 22. Maybe fewer people live from paycheck to paycheck than you think. Story 23. Many people I know are talking about it, but the news does not cover it except in small blurbs. Story 24. It has become the norm. We assume we are all in the same boat. There is no need to state the obvious. Story 25. I think for some people it is shame. Being poor is seen as a moral failing rather than a failure of our entire society. I'm not embarrassed to be poor, but it does get difficult when you can't afford the basics. Story 26. Many loud people on social media claim financial hardship but reveal, implicitly or explicitly, that their situation is self-inflicted. Others stay quiet about their struggles because they do not want to appear foolish or expose their own mistakes. People also internalize guilt about money, saying things like, "I make plenty, but I need to cut back on frivolous expenses," or "I could afford a better apartment, but I do not want to buy store-brand groceries." Story 27. You know when something is so normalized that people do not even think twice about it? For example, when everyone accepted working in the office with long commutes until they experienced working from home during the pandemic. I think that is part of it. Story 28. Because it is hard for most people to admit to themselves or others that they are financially irresponsible. Story 29. I feel looked down on by a relative who drives trucks. I drove trucks too but made mistakes and am now back to working a 9 to 5. He looks down on me because I still live in the neighborhood. It is often cheaper, and there is little point in paying high rent if you can barely afford bills and food. Yet he still returns to our mother's house rather than his own place, even though many truckers have an apartment or house. In general, people who chastise you are often hypocritical. Story 30. Plenty of people talk about it, especially people like Bernie Sanders. Story 31. Americans are dumb enough to think they are 2 pay periods from being a billionaire, when in reality they are 2 pay periods from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Story 32. The shutdown was eye-opening for me, specifically the part about air traffic controllers needing to find other work. I understand their job is stressful, but they are generally well-paid, high-quality people. I would expect them to have some basic savings, and the idea that many of them could not go 2 months without pay, knowing there would be back pay at the end, seemed odd to me. Story 33. Some people live paycheck to paycheck because of their choices. Others may earn the same income but make better financial decisions and do not live that way. Old Irish saying, O'Malley earns £10 and spends 11. The result is misery. O'Donoghue earns £10 and spends 9. The result is joy. Some people earn little, do all the right things, and still end up on the paycheck-to-paycheck treadmill. From observation, I think the O'Malleys of the world make up most of the problem. I know people driving vehicles that cost 10 times what they can afford. I know people who earn healthy incomes but could not come up with $5,000 if their life depended on it. I know fathers who do not have a dollar for their children but will fly to another state for a golf game. Story 34. Everyone talks about it, but why don't people ever talk about budgeting for life expenses and reducing attachment to the material world? Some people who have nothing are richer than kings. Story 35. People living paycheck to paycheck because of poor money habits rarely talk about it. They often do not realize how serious their predicament is and do not think there is a problem. Story 36. People choose to live paycheck to paycheck because of poor career decisions and even poorer financial management. Then they blame everyone else. Story 37. For the low-income spectrum, it is understandable. People with higher incomes often lack the discipline to live below their means. They upgrade their lifestyle and end up living paycheck to paycheck. Story 38. For about 40 years we have been lied to. We were told that America was the greatest country and that if you are struggling it is your fault and that you are lazy. Like many problems today, this can be traced to a specific point and group. They shamed us into silence because they have no morals or empathy. Story 39. Because the wealthy have fooled you into focusing more on your differences. Story 40. Because the government and people in power do not care and will do nothing. Story 41. Probably because this sort of thing is becoming normal and almost expected. Unless you have a well-paying job or very low expenses, it is a struggle. Story 42. What do you mean? Economic issues are a significant topic of conversation right now. Story 43. Because the mass media are more interested in talking about wealthy people, the ones who pay them money. Story 44. I am not sure where you are. People are talking about it everywhere. Story 45. Growing up, I did not know any life other than living paycheck to paycheck. I am pretty sure my parents still do not. What is there to talk about? Story 46. What is there to discuss? Not everyone talks about reality just for the sake of talking. Story 47. The culture war keeps them occupied enough to ignore class issues. When you are forced to choose a side, you must accept that side's delusions. Story 48. People talk about it a lot. The reported average household income is often misleading because averages do not represent a majority. A graph that shows the mean income at its peak can be distorted by high earners. If you show a bar chart with each bar representing a $1,000 income range, the vast majority of households fall below the midpoint. It sounds better for the media to say that average Americans earn $83,000 a year, but a small number of very high earners pull the average upward, so that number does not reflect a typical household. Story 49. It depends on who you talk to. If you work with higher income people, it does not come up often. When you earn $200,000 per year, there is a lot of wiggle room. If you work with lower income people, you will hear it often. The cost of groceries, childcare, and rent is a frequent complaint. There is also a societal stigma against discussing money in depth. People rarely talk about saving, investing, or their financial situation. Story 50. Temporarily embarrassed millionaire. Everyone thinks this is just a temporary setback. They will be rich one day. Just wait. Story 51. This is a terrible, poorly defined phrase that attracts a lot of buzz because it sounds worse than it actually is. Story 52. Money is tied to self-worth. People often feel embarrassed. Admitting financial problems can feel like admitting personal failure. Story 53. On top of being overworked, American culture has taught us to be ashamed of not being wealthy. There is a stigma directly tied to financial insecurity. Story 54. The media and pundits best positioned to discuss it are more interested in knowing who those living paycheck to paycheck are voting for. Story 55. This is normal. Even if you are saving and investing, you usually live paycheck to paycheck on whatever you do not save or invest. Story 56. Many have been taught to believe that having less money than others is somehow shameful or that no one wants to hear about others' problems. Story 57. What do you want to talk about? It is the natural progression for most people in the working world. Story 58. Most people are caught up in performative normalcy, no matter how bad it gets for them. Story 59. Capitalism has taught us to blame those people for not earning more money. Story 60. People talk about it constantly. If it were discussed any further, there would be no other topics. Story 61. Not many people realize how close they are to being broke. One medical event, even with insurance, is often all it takes for many to wipe out what they have in the bank and even tap their credit. Medicare for all now. Stop fucking around, Democrats. Put it on the table for the next election. It might not pass soon, but people are looking for leadership that represents them and their needs. Story 62. I was taught not to because it was seen as shameful in my family, even though 90% lived that way. Story 63. I tried talking about it once, but people living paycheck to paycheck downvoted me and labeled me elitist. Story 64. It's all relative. Almost everyone lives paycheck to paycheck, even those in $1 million house. Story 65. I would also like to add that many of these paycheck to paycheck people are too comfortable and are willing to go into debt to keep up with the Joneses. Story 66. I think people do not like to talk about how close they actually are. Sure, we complain about the cost of things, but most people are not going to say that it was a week of bologna fried rice this month just to get by. Story 67. People don't want to be lectured on how to spend their money. It's hard enough as it is, and they spend to enjoy themselves and get through. Story 68. We have accepted that there is nothing we can do about it. Governments worldwide have become more corrupt over the years, redirecting wealth from the people who produce it to wealthy individuals who grow their wealth through capital gains. It is much like climate change. The time to act to reverse it passed long ago. It is too late now. Story 69. I am pretty sure Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Elizabeth Warren, and others talk about it all the time. Story 70. Funny thing is, I think I'm going to be fine in retirement, but I'm still living paycheck to paycheck and probably will be until then. I hope it gets easier. Story 71. The ruling class controls the messaging that tells us it is shameful to discuss how unaffordable living in the United States has become. Story 72. In the United States, it is generally not appropriate to talk about money, such as how much you earn or how much you have. If you are not doing well financially, you may choose not to tell others because they may not understand. Story 73. I do not have the money to socialize, and I am tired of living this way. Story 74. Reach out if you need to talk about it. The elite are out of touch, or they want you to die at work chasing a unicorn. Guess who makes the decisions? They do not care about you if you still provide enough for them. The government can probably get a good idea of most people's finances. Story 75. When everyone has a 30-year mortgage, calling it a ripoff is not interesting. Story 76. For the same reason I do not talk about cutting my nails. Story 77. Because people have been living paycheck to paycheck for years, many do not consider it unusual or unwise. For example, try explaining compound interest to someone. Even my wife, who understands compound interest, was very hesitant to enter the stock market 40 years ago. Thank God I won that one. Story 78. There is not much to talk about. Unless you are going to give financial help or advice, the conversation starts and ends with I am broke. Laughing my ass off. Story 79. I am a single person with no children who owns part of a multi-generational home. I am close to not living paycheck to paycheck, but it always feels like I am only one flat tire or a fallen tree on the fence away. Story 80. Embarrassment and the smoke and mirrors make it feel as if everyone is working and doing well. I feel that there must be something wrong with me. Unfortunately, that path can lead some people to take their own lives. Story 81. For the same reason, many people do not admit they are in credit card debt. They do not like being judged. Story 82. I don't like talking about it. I make good money, but I have been recovering from poor financial choices for years and cannot live as if I earn that much. Story 83. My friends who are not in the same boat just do not get it. Frankly, we would be fine if my wife had a real job to bring in more income, but she is pursuing her passion and I cannot deny that to her. Story 84. Because some people do not live paycheck to paycheck, it is awkward to discuss that situation with someone who does not. Story 85. Social media has made people, or the vast majority of users, feel they must present themselves as rich and successful. People constantly try to flex over trivial things and refuse to admit they cannot afford what they flaunt. They will not tell friends or neighbors they need help because they fear the people they are trying to impress will look down on them. They remain in the dark. If someone turned on a light, they would see they are all in the same room, but pride keeps their eyes closed. Story 86. I see other people living large. I may need to work harder. Story 87. It is discussed all the time. Every city subreddit contains posts about the cost of living crisis and how others are coping. Story 88. Honest question. What is there to talk about? In a roundabout way, people talk about it constantly. Costs of housing, healthcare, and groceries keep rising. People are not complaining that their rent on a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment just increased 20% because they have money to burn. They are complaining because if the average person lost their job, they could not afford rent for more than 3 months. Story 89. When I worked in restaurants, I knew people who were living day to day. One bad shift and they would not be able to survive the next week. It was terrifying. Story 90. We have been living paycheck to paycheck for the past 50 years. Story 91. It sucks, but you have to change with the times. One job won't cover you. Find another job, part-time or full-time. Story 92. It's crazy that people should be rioting against the government for its failure to help the working class, but everyone is so weak these days. Story 93. It is a shame. Unfortunately, more people do not talk about it because doing so would galvanize change. Story 94. They are too busy thinking about their next DoorDash order from McDonald's, where they will spend $22 on a single meal, to wonder where their money went. Story 95. Many people avoid talking about this because they would have to consider how many are not making it from paycheck to paycheck and are going under. Living paycheck to paycheck is like treading water. Many people are actually drowning. Story 96. I think there is a happy medium between oversharing and being too stoic or tight-lipped. Most people do not like to be around those who discuss problems all the time. It is more uplifting to talk about other topics. Everyone has enough problems of their own, not just financial concerns but aging parents, sick children, and more. Who wants to hear only about that? I prefer hearing about other aspects of people's lives, especially at work. I also do not think it is my business to know what people spend their money on. They earned it. If they want to spend it wisely or foolishly, that is up to them. What seems foolish to me may be right for someone else. I do not impose my standards on others. Story 97. There is not much to say. When people invite me to concerts or other expensive events, I decline and thank them. I have a few generous friends who know my situation and sometimes buy a ticket for me, but I do not complain to people about my situation. I keep my finances to myself. I do not splurge on payday because that money is already allocated for phone, internet, rent, transit card, and other expenses. Occasionally, I have the opportunity to work overtime and treat myself. I wish I could buy better presents for friends. Holidays can be embarrassing. Story 98. Most of them do it to themselves, which makes it harder to sympathize with the rest, since it is difficult to distinguish irresponsible people from those who are genuinely trying. Story 99. Facebook type shame and feelings of regret and disappointment in themselves. Story 100. I am probably better off than I think, but I also assume most of my coworkers are better off and I am okay with that. Story 101. What are you talking about? That's all people have been talking about, at least online. Story 102. People are always talking about it. Where have you been all these years? Story 103. Who would listen? When the same issues occur day after day, you get tired of talking about them. You're either at work or tired. Story 104. The phrase paycheck to paycheck does not really mean anything. I pay my bills and invest part of every paycheck. I do not touch my savings between paychecks. Does that mean I am living paycheck to paycheck? In daily life, yes, but not truly. Story 105. Probably because they do not feel like bragging about it. Story 106. It's not exactly something to be proud of. People rarely talk about their difficult situations unless it benefits them. Story 107. Who wants to discuss that, thinking everyone does it, only to have your buddy look at you confused and say, I have $200,000 in my savings and my house is paid off? Story 108. Everyone talks about it and lives paycheck to paycheck. Whether I was making minimum wage or my net worth reached millions, I always lived that way. Everyone chooses to live paycheck to paycheck. Story 109. Part of the problem is self-doubt and recrimination. I lived like that when I was younger, but I had better jobs and learned about the importance of savings in my 30s. The situation I hear is worse these days. Some people I know who live that way also choose that lifestyle by buying things they do not need. That is not everyone. It is just my experience as a middle-aged white man. Like so many people I know, I once lived in a rundown apartment on Maitland Street. Story 110. When you live paycheck to paycheck, you do the work with pride. You do it yourself without help. You do it without complaining because you do not want pity. Talking about being poor can feel like begging for a handout. We keep our heads down, our mouths shut, and keep going. Story 111. What will talking about it do? I'm embarrassed by it. Story 112. Many people feel like victims, but they are at least somewhat conscious that everyone is responsible for their own outcomes. That is how I hope most adults navigate their lives. Story 113. They view the credit card in their pocket as a source of financial security rather than as the fuse on a stick of financial dynamite. Story 114. People aren't interested in sharing their miserable existence. They only put on a good face. It is human nature for many. Story 115. Because admitting you are broke is like admitting you do not know the wireless network password. It is a level of vulnerability we are just not ready for. Story 116. Not exactly sure what you want people to talk about in this regard. Saying I am also struggling financially is not an uplifting everyday topic. Story 117. We have been trained not to talk about our struggles. If enough people understand how much the wealthy have been taking from the poor, stagnating wages, destroying unions, and chipping away at social safety nets for their own greed, and stop blaming those who have even less. We might wake up, see that we outnumber them, and claim our power. But they keep us distracted and turned against one another. Story 118. You are not allowed to talk about it because then wealthy people would have to pay you more. Shoo. Story 119. To those who are not in the same situation, it may sound like whining. Story 120. We do. To be honest, this falls under men not talking about emotions and similar topics. If you think people do not talk about how broke they are, it is because you are often ignoring them. I do not think I have met a single other man in my life who has not said how rough his finances are. I am not a social person. Story 121. It has been discussed by everyone working minimum wage jobs for at least 35 years. The problem is the political party you align with acts like it cares to get your vote and does nothing about it. They know you will keep voting for them because maybe this time they will do something about it. They will not. Story 122. I think it's pride. It's like when you don't ask your friends for money when you're broke because you're embarrassed. Story 123. It is because it is shameful and people do not talk about it. Story 124. It's not exciting enough for people to pay attention. So until we actually care, the status quo continues. Meanwhile, society continues to distract us so we do not notice. As a result, we remain distracted. Story 125. Well, I guess some will be budgeting their money and will use it accordingly. Story 126. A woman I know says she lives paycheck to paycheck, but she lives in a very expensive part of town, pays for an expensive workout club, eats out all the time, and has no roommates to split rent and bills. I think it is largely self-induced. Maybe others are in the same situation and are embarrassed to admit it. Story 127. I agree with the point you are trying to make. No one is doing well financially. However, living paycheck to paycheck is not a good measure because some people are simply poor at managing their money. Even millionaires could be living paycheck to paycheck if they spend too much each month. Story 128. Because admitting you are one unexpected vet bill away from financial ruin really kills the vibe at parties. Story 129. We talk, whine, and complain about it. Then we cry or become depressed. At the end of the day, you and I are still alive. Story 130. I live in a country where the average salaried worker must work 10 to 12 hours a day and gets 1 day off per week. People do not have the time to talk about it, nor the energy to take to the streets, and the ruling class makes great use of this fact. Story 131. I believe the vast majority of people live paycheck to paycheck regardless of their income bracket. Story 132. For the most part, I was raised not to ask how much someone earns or how much something costs. Even recently, as an adult, a friend reminded me that asking someone how many cows they have while on my friend's farm is essentially asking how much is in their bank account. Overall, I think society in the United States was raised to treat money as an adult subject and to consider personal finances private. Rough statistics indicate that about 40% of people do not know what a 401k retirement plan is. 75% could not come up with $2,000 for an emergency, and many people could not afford to miss a single paycheck. Talking about money with others and at younger ages would probably lead to better outcomes. Story 133. In the United Kingdom, we are too busy talking about whether a politician saying that seeing black people on television drives me mad is racist. Story 134. I do. My boss likes to point out that he doesn't, whenever he can, and I laugh and think to myself, but you're borderline morbidly obese, you just had major heart surgery, and I'm pretty sure you're a virgin. Story 135. In the United States, we have a peculiar kind of pride about income. For most people, embarrassment sits just above what they actually earn, so pretending to make more has become standard behavior. That's part of why so many vote against their own financial interests. Social programs are seen as for the poor. Most who would benefit don't see themselves as poor. They think of themselves as wealthy people who are temporarily low on cash, even if that temporary has lasted their entire lives. This mindset is why we hear so little open talk about living paycheck to paycheck. Story 136. I have never met anyone who is not talking about living paycheck to paycheck. Where do you live? Story 137. Because admitting you are broke is like admitting you peed in the pool. Everyone knows it happens, but no one wants to be the one who says it out loud. Story 138. Between work, spending, and collection agency calls, who has time? Story 139. It is easier and more fun to lie about your monthly income on Reddit to make people feel worse about their lives. Personally, I would not do that. Story 140. Headlines a while back reported that 1/3 of households in the United States of America making $250,000 a year were living paycheck to paycheck. That's not an income problem. It's an uncontrolled spending problem. People don't talk about it because things like budgeting and investing for later are considered boring. Story 141. In Singapore, it is considered shameful to talk about your struggles. You will be seen as weak and lazy, so many people just suck it up and work 2 jobs even though they are living paycheck to paycheck in this absurd cost of living crisis. Story 142. People inevitably blame you for being in that situation. The cost of living is out of control and housing, especially here in Australia, is ridiculous. If you say you are living week to week, watch the armchair critics come out of the woodwork. For example, they say it is your fault for not budgeting, for spending too much, or for having champagne tastes on a beer budget. Why open yourself up to that kind of thing? Story 143. Many people live paycheck to paycheck. It is everyone's story and nothing new. The Great Gatsby is in charge. Story 144. The United States is the richest country on the planet, yet its people receive very little support. Trump's monetary donation to Argentina included funds to provide food assistance to its citizens. He is willing to provide money for food assistance to other countries, but we do not receive the same support. Story 145. People who live paycheck to paycheck don't want real solutions to their loser problems. Story 146. What is there to say? They could be in that position for a myriad of reasons. Story 147. People do. I was just talking to someone the other day who can barely get to work. Story 148. Most people consciously or subconsciously compare themselves to others, and for that reason they often like to put on a show. They point to a nice car, a large house, and fancy new technology. Behind the scenes, their bank account may be one missed paycheck away from losing those items to the bank that technically owns them. People do not talk about it because they are embarrassed and prefer to appear better off than they are. Not everyone is like this, generalizations are bad. But the people I know with the nicest possessions are often the most financially strained. Story 149. I worry a lot about retirement. Am I going to have enough money to retire, or will I have to work until I die? Story 150. We talk about it. We drink and complain about work and the cost of things while we fix them because it is too expensive to hire someone else. Story 151. The prosperity gospel shames people for being poor. Story 152. Don't say many and then but. No buts, because that turns people into liars. You should be confident in yourself. I'm genuinely concerned for your well-being. You wouldn't want to be perceived or turned into a liar. I had a kindergarten manipulator try doing that to me once because he felt rejected by me, and there was also a woman who did it because she tried to hook up with my brother and became jealous of me, so she tried to turn me into a liar and a dajjal by making me speak like this. If it's good, it's good. You have to be confident in yourself. Story 153. Our economy is built on the assumption that people will spend more as they earn more, and they do. If most Americans received a $20,000 raise, they would be complaining about living paycheck to paycheck within 12 months. Their new lifestyle becomes the baseline. This is why people at all income levels live paycheck to paycheck. If you think about it, the true minimum standard of living is not very different between someone who earns $200,000 a year and someone who earns $50,000 a year. Story 154. Even if we did start talking about it, what would we do? Work for a pittance or be homeless and die? Story 155. What is there to talk about exactly? As long as you have food, water, and shelter, you are good. Story 156. In our culture, money is a measure of status, so people who are broke feel embarrassed and tend not to speak about it. Story 157. What exactly should we talk about? How broke we are, saving for a mini vacation, or gathering money for the children's clothes and food. Story 158. Because it is difficult to admit, money struggles often cause distress, even though many others face the same situation. Story 159. Why should we talk about the life circumstances of others? Unless you intend to help them improve their financial situation, discussing their lives is irrelevant. It does not make sense. You sound like a gossip who wants to know the lives of other people in order to judge and criticize them for not having the same lifestyle as you. Story 160. A lot of money is spent controlling our conversations about it. Story 161. It is embarrassing. I have paid all my bills this month and I have $88 in the bank. I did not receive my food stamps, so I am trying to stretch what is left in the pantry. That means pasta, potatoes, and being grateful I stocked up on fish. The cat food had better hold out until December. I hope my pantry will last that long. I found out today I might have to start paying a copay for my therapist and for the nurse aides who come 3 times a week to help me. I am not sure where I am going to cut back. Story 162. Many people live like this and we are frustrated. Yelling in an echo chamber will not help. Politicians do not seem worried to act either, so what is left? We could protest, but we cannot even miss 1 day of work each week to take action without further hurting ourselves. Story 163. Many people who live paycheck to paycheck are saddled with debt. It's hard to complain about making ends meet after making the choices that put you there. We need more financial literacy in this country. Credit cards are not free money. You shouldn't have a car payment that is half your rent. Set a budget and stick to it. Story 164. With Department of Veterans Affairs disability benefits, I make close to $200,000 a year, and I am fully aware that I am still living paycheck to paycheck. We are fiscally responsible, increasing our savings and carrying very little credit card debt. We have a reasonable mortgage that my disability benefits cover. 1 car is fully paid off, and we do not have to pay registration because I am exempt as a disabled veteran. My wife is a stay-at-home wife, and she is worth every penny. Simply put, I have 5 mouths to feed. My wife, for animals, and myself. The food and grocery bill is steep. If I were to lose my job tomorrow, we would be in serious trouble. To answer your question, the people you are asking about are most likely working right now, probably even working a second job. Story 165. My peers who do DoorDash and who travel the world cannot seem to stop talking about it. Story 166. The proposed solution is essentially don't live there, which people resist. Many adults feel entitled to live where they were born, even though economic forces push them elsewhere. There are few jobs outside these areas, while large portions of the population live in them and receive higher pay relative to local costs. If everyone moved there, prices would rise, but that has not happened, so prices have not increased accordingly. People do not like being told that to receive value they must also provide value. Story 167. I love it when politicians say, the American people are suffering, and then suggest everyone is overweight, driving giant SUVs they can barely afford and buying worthless plastic junk. No, they are just foolish and undisciplined. Story 168. They may earn a good income but are poor at managing it and are overextended on a mortgage or car loan. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.